I'm going to talk about kind of some of what I saw in my 3 days at Urban Shield and also some of the kind of larger context around it. So Urban Shield is, it's basically there's two parts of it. There's the kind of an expo part of it, which is fairly new, and then there's the training exercise, which is how Urban Shield started, I think 6 years ago, something like that. I'm not sure on the number, 2006, maybe more than 6 years, but basically the main event to Urban Shield is a 2-day competition between SWAT teams. There's over 30 SWAT teams. Most of them are from the Bay Area, but also participating as a team is the U.S. Marines. There's South Korea was there this year. Singapore was there. In past years, there's been Bahrain, Israel, other countries. There's a SWAT team made up of prison guards. And there's also a SWAT team from UC Berkeley. And they, go around the Bay Area and all counties of the Bay Area, and they go through about 30 exercises, 48 hours straight. There's very little sleep involved. And some of the exercises they do, they do kind of things like hostage scenarios. There was one scenario that was like a boat, a cargo ship in the bay, where the scenario was that there was an earthquake, and in the chaos of the earthquake, a terrorist group took over the ship, and they had to, rescue the ship. There were, there were airplanes scenarios. You have like a prison guards, taking over an airplane. There were some situations like sovereign citizens, right-wing group, house eviction. There was an atheist hostage taking in a church. And so those are some of the scenarios, but a relatively new component of Urban Shield is the trade show. And the reason that there's the trade show is because Urban Shield is mostly funded by Homeland Security, but it's also funded by corporations. It's a relatively small part of the funding, but corporations pay for tables. And there's 2 days where they show their stuff, and the SWAT teams come around. So you go into the hotel. There's about 35 SWAT teams. A lot of them are in camo, black, just kind of milling around, eating croissants and things like that. And checking out assault rifles, sniper rifles. Some of the stuff that one thing I saw that stood out was a device that attaches to a gun. It's supposed to be out this January, and it sends a frequency that blinds people for 10 minutes. So, and it's called Zero, as in zero damage. And they say the way that it works, they say, I tried to follow up on this and get some of the science behind it, but couldn't. But is that it scrambles your ocular fluid. I don't really know what that means, but I was hanging around the table as I was doing throughout the convention, just kind of listening to what people were saying. And that particular table, the guy, was someone from a SWAT team came up, and the vendor said, "Hey, check out our new toy. Imagine walking into a bar fight and just blinding everybody, and then figuring out what's going on. It's just kind of like first, just to kind of like calm the situation down." Some of the other things were like Homeland Security contracted to a company to build little robots. There were a lot of drones. They had like a little kind of video robot that a lot of stuff now is like built on 3D printers and can be printed on the spot. So the police, take the printers to the site, and if the little robot is too big, they print out a new body and put the wiring inside of the new one. One of the most interesting conversations I had at the expo hall for me, it was an interview with a guy that there were several companies that sold the kind of big armored trucks, the things that kind of look like tanks or APCs. And I just interviewed him about, what he used this stuff for, and he said, active shooters, hostage scenarios. He also mentioned responding to suicide threats, pedophiles. He basically said, any situation that was a threat to us. So I was surprised to hear that suicides were on the list, but I asked him about protests, like when, I'd seen vehicles like that in Oakland before at protests, and asked him what kind of situation do you use these in? You know, would police use this in a protest? And he said, you know, anytime there's a threat of violence, he specifically said a threat of when protesters might shoot at police. And you know, I said, I've never heard of that happening before. And he said, well, you know, it happens. We don't like to admit it, but it happens. And I said, well, can you give an example of that happening? And, you know, he couldn't. But, you know, I looked more into this company, looked on their website, and they have, they basically kind of advertise themselves to police. You know, they're trying to sell these vehicles that are $200,000 to $300,000, and they have someone on staff who writes grants to Homeland Security. They also, you know, teach that police can use forfeiture money, which is money that is seized in criminal investigations, even if the person is not ultimately convicted. This is a huge, huge pot of money. But something that I think is really important to understand is that, you know, there's been a lot of attention on the kind of Pentagon, the weapons that are being given to police. But, you know, it's actually since, let's see, I wrote it down here. The Pentagon has given $5.1 billion in equipment to police since 1997. Homeland Security has given $41 billion since 2007. And a big difference is not only in the money, in the amount, but Homeland Security is giving money. Pentagon is giving stuff. So Homeland Security, you know, Homeland Security puts on Urban Shield, and the people that are selling the stuff, most of the stuff except weapons, police can't buy weapons with Homeland Security money, but pretty much everything else they can buy with grants. So this whole kind of grant process, which is, you know, post 9/11, has really kind of created a lot of this industry. A lot of these companies that I talk to are post 9/11 companies, and you know, I went to some of the training scenarios. I went to one on a Amtrak train where the Marines were kind of going through, and it was kind of an exercise where there was a shooter on the train. And actually, as a side note, I, you know, talked to the Marines after and asked them why, you know, why they're in a police competition, you know, as soldiers, and they said that we learn a lot from the police, and we take these skills, SWAT skills, back to the military. And the spokesperson for Urban Shield talked to me about the politicization of the military. You know, he said there's a lot of talk about the militarization of the police, but also, you know, the police are learning a lot from the military. And he also, you know, I asked him at one point, I said, you know, do you think there's validity to the criticism that the United States is increasingly becoming a police state? And he said, yes, I think there is. But back to what I was saying before, so, you know, I went to that exercise. I also went to an exercise where the UC Berkeley SWAT team was, it was a hostage scenario. The scenario was that there was a Muslim man who had been fired from his job. He heard that he had been heard making anti-Semitic comments. He had literature calling for jihad against Israel, and you know, he'd been heard making the statement that he wanted to take revenge on Jews for what they did to him and his people. And this is the setup. And then, you know, he's in this building with the dummy that's the hostage, and he had a bucket of chemicals. He also had been to websites with chemical weapons. So he had a bucket of chemicals, and the police bust in, and he, you know, activates the chemicals, and they bubbled over. And, you know, at that point, that was the fourth day that I had been at Urban Shield, and it really kind of became clear to me, this kind of, the recurring psychology that I saw there was basically two things. One is, you know, police need to be protected. If you're a police officer, how could you say we shouldn't be more protected? And also, we need to be prepared for extreme scenarios. So, you know, we have throughout Urban Shield, there's very kind of terrifying extreme situations. But I talked to the Berkeley SWAT teams SWAT team after and asked them what they do on the job, you know. And most of what they do is serving warrants. This is actually what most SWAT teams do. In particular, the UC Berkeley SWAT team, typically, I asked him more, and he said that they're usually responding to muggings of students. So it's this kind of like regular police work that they, you know, while they're training for kind of an IED on the Bay Bridge, what they're doing day to day is serving warrants, mostly drug warrants. Most SWAT teams, the most conservative estimate I found is about 67% of SWAT raids are for drugs. The kind of original reason that SWAT teams were created was for active shooters, for hostages, and that kind of stuff, and that almost never is the use anymore. So towards the end, you know, I got kicked out. The second day, I had kind of gone through several events. I was invited to actually go to these, and I interviewed with my colleague. We were filming. We interviewed we went to the Bay Bridge. We were going to go out on a boat, and then from this boat, climb up a ladder and go into the underbelly of the Bay Bridge to dismantle an IED. And they told us that we couldn't go, or we could go actually, but we couldn't film. So, you know, we just decided not to go, and we're going to go to the next thing. There were a ton of things happening. But we interviewed a vendor. All of these sites had company vendors there. This one had a drone vendor, and they were kind of bummed out because they weren't allowed to. They were going to actually fly the drone in the scenario, but the county has not yet got approval from the FAA. So we interviewed him, you know, kind of straightforward, and later he said, you know, I don't like the feeling I'm getting from you guys. He heard us talking about whether we should, you know, watch South Korea intercept an airplane or go watch the prison guards evict sovereign citizens, and, you know, he didn't like the vibe, I guess, and he said, you know, you can't use the interview. If you do, I'm going to take you to court. And we left, and after we left, a police officer came out and asked for our press credentials, and, you know, said that he got word from his commander that we had been filming an unauthorized location, and I asked him where that was, and he didn't know, and I talked to the spokesperson, I never found out where it was, and so, you know, we were just kicked out, basically. So, yeah, I'm just going to leave it there for a Q&A, but I did write an article about this, and it will be in the next issue of Mother Jones, and there's also going to be several videos online that should be out in a couple weeks, so check it out. Thanks.
All right, good evening, and thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Joshua Smith, and I'm a local activist from Oakland, California. For years, I've had a deep interest and a passion in being an eyewitness observer of brutal actions that governments take against people who organize, speak out, and stand up to the state. As a militant researcher, I find it extremely important, especially in our modern society, to connect the dots, see the big picture, and share it with others. For this, I've utilized many different internet resources, including file sharing, Twitter, which I tweet under the username @DomainAwareness. My email address is occupyoakland@riseup.net. Now, over the past 7 to 8 years, I've witnessed much violence at numerous political protests in the United States and abroad. In 2009, I participated in the uprising against the Pittsburgh G20, where people on the front lines at the barricades found themselves subject to the very first deployment and use of LRAD against political protesters. LRAD is long-range acoustic device, and it's a very high-pitched, focused beam that's supposed to hurt your head so much because it's so loud. I was able to capture the LRAD attacks on cell phone video, which was immediately uploaded to YouTube. and ultimately received over 500,000 views. By that very same evening, the LRADs were supported with billowing clouds of tear gas, hundreds of riot troops, swinging batons, police helicopters, white vans, and transport buses, all occurring under lethal overwatch of snipers. Backing up the police was the U.S. Army, operating Black Hawk helicopters and armored Humvees. Uniformed U.S. military were on the streets. Pittsburgh was a full-on military attack, which also targeted social media users who were raided by SWAT in real time as the events unfolded. Later that same year, I protested and took part in actions in Tahrir Square, Cairo, East Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Ramallah, and Erez, which is the northern crossing into Gaza. In those locations, myself and others were victim to severe intimidation at gunpoint, brutality, arrest, and detainment by local law enforcement and military. But that is a much longer story. All of this seems to be the new global model for law enforcement, a model that we also witnessed in this city, where Occupy Oakland made global news for the general violent tactics they endured. Urban Shield is yet another cog in the wheels of full-on militarization, all under the umbrella of the Department of Homeland Security and the Pentagon, currently under the ultimate command of the Nobel Peace Prize winner and supposed constitutional law professor Barack Obama. On September 4th, I attended the full day of Urban Shield designated as Session 1, which included 4 seminars from 8:30 a.m. to 4:15 p.m. This was held at the Oakland Convention Center Marriott Hotel. The first seminar was called The Mission-Oriented Mass Murderer, a Behavioral and Operational Perspective. The speaker was Mary O'Toole, a retired FBI special agent from the Behavioral Analysis Unit. The official description of Ms. O'Toole's presentation is as follows. This presentation will provide an assessment model to better understand the behavior and motivation of these types of mass killers. Case examples of mission-oriented shooters will be presented in terms of how they are distinct in terms of motivation, leakage, warning behaviors, pre-planning behaviors, and the presence of psychopathic traits and characteristics. What I found most notable about this seminar was that I believe much more emphasis should be put on the fact that most mass shootings are perpetrated by those either under the influence of SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which are all too often prescribed to millions of Americans for depression and anxiety. Most all modern mass shootings, in one way or another, involve those under the influence of these medications or are suffering from withdrawal from these medications. This includes all derivatives and combinations of Prozac, Paxil, and Zoloft. Much information on this topic can be found easily, but it seems the state does not wish to point any fingers at the big pharma financial empire connecting their pills to pistols. The second seminar was the medical response to Asiana Flight 214 plane crash at San Francisco Airport. The speaker was an MD from Stanford University Division of Emergency Medicine. The official description of his presentation was as follows. Stanford University Medical Center is the trauma center for San Mateo County and provided medical care for more victims from the Asiana Flight 214 crash than any other hospital. This presentation discusses the disaster response to the plane crash, the medical care provided, and unique aspects of the incident and mechanism for many of the injuries. What I found notable about this seminar was that there was no discussion of the Asiana passenger that was ejected from the plane and summarily killed by being run over by a fire rescue vehicle. This, now proven cause of death, was first denied by the city of San Francisco. Also, in overhearing 2 law enforcement officers speaking directly after the presentation, one officer mentioned the injuries of those sitting over the wing section of the plane. And interestingly enough, the other officer replied, "You know, that's where the terrorists like to sit with bombs." Completely unrelated to the statement of one officer, the second found a connection, a nexus, to terrorism, even when discussing innocent victims of a plane crash. The third seminar was called Lessons Learned, the Los Angeles International Airport Shooting. The speaker was Patrick Gannon. He's Deputy Executive Director of Homeland Security and Public Safety for LAWA, Los Angeles World Airports, and he was formerly the South Bureau Deputy Police Chief. The official description of Mr. Gannon's presentation was as follows. On November 1, 2013, at approximately 0920 hours, a young man entered Terminal 3 at LAX and opened fire with an assault rifle, killing one person and wounding 3 others. What I found notable about this seminar was A, we watched an unedited and previously unreleased surveillance video of the actual murder of the first TSA agent. And B, in this presentation, it was disclosed that the FBI director had flown into LA earlier that same morning. The final seminar was called Police Under Attack, a debrief review of the Christopher Dorner incident. The official description of this presentation was as follows. For 10 days in February 2013, former LAPD officer Christopher Dorner put Southern California policing agencies in an unprecedented collective state of alert, one in which both excellent and heroic police work was done and some regrettable decisions were made. The speakers were a sergeant and a detective from the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. What I found notable about this seminar was that there was no connection to the fact that Dorner was not just a mass shooter. He came from the mindset of trained military and that of a police officer. This shooter was one of their own. And they avoided the concept that he was also a whistleblower, driven to rage by a coordinated retaliation against him. They also belittled him as not being as tactical as the media made him out to be. But yet he successfully ambushed the police 3 to 4 times and ultimately losing the last battle in a burning barricaded standoff. Furthermore, they also displayed previously unreleased close-up autopsy photos and referred to him as a crispy critter. Aside from the seminars was the trade show exposition. Here, as I'm sure we may hear about a couple of times tonight, was a plethora of direct examples of militarization and the aggressive military warrior mindset. Sniper rifles, M16s, pistols, drones, tactical gear, knives, accessories, armored vehicles, and surveillance vans. I had an interesting experience at the expo table for NICRIC, which is the Northern California Regional Intelligence Center. I picked up some free informational brochures and a small notepad. The uniformed officer at the NICRIC table immediately asked if I was law enforcement, and I responded, "No, I am an analyst," only to have the material abruptly and physically snatched from my hands. Then upon leaving the NICRIC table, 2 uniformed officers followed me for about 2 minutes within the expo. Eventually they stopped me and scrutinized my expo pass, and I was soon allowed to continue on my way. To sum up the trade show exposition, I'd like to say that the only feeling an outsider takes away from observing the overall behavior, body language, and spoken use of language is that the mindset has nothing to do with the term peace officer. It is most definitely and certainly enforcement with law as the excuse. Thank you.
I volunteered to go inside and inside the exercises, which went on, as Shane said, for 48 hours. So the police teams, the law enforcement teams, were up for 48 hours. Volunteers went in for 12-hour shifts at a time. We could be there from 5 in the morning until 5 at night, 5 at night until 5 in the morning on Saturday, and the same on Sunday. And I wound up on Sunday night at the airport. Anybody could have volunteered. I was curious about going inside because I had been very critical of Urban Shield, and I thought it was irresponsible to be so critical without actually seeing what it was from the inside. So I volunteered. I was given a choice of 4 scenarios to volunteer for as either a good role player or a bad role player. One was the Bay Bridge, and I guess that's what Shane talked about, I'm not sure. The second was East Bay Mud, something about East Bay Mud, and then Orange Area Command, and I think these were where there were 4 or 5 times when all of the police teams got to take a break and checked in with medical personnel to make sure that they were all okay. And the 4th was called the Airport Interdiction. And that sounded interesting, so I showed up at the airport on 5 o'clock Sunday night. There were perhaps 12 to 15 volunteers, most of whom had done this in the past, and most of whom were somehow involved in either the military or in law enforcement, and their participation in Urban Shield gave them credits in their professional advancement, which I thought was pretty interesting. I seemed to be the only one who was just there for curiosity, and I was wondering whether they would wonder if I was some kind of spy or infiltrator. And I was perfectly frank. They were talking about the demonstration that had happened a few days earlier down at the convention center, and I said a couple times, yes, I was part of organizing it. And nobody turned me in. I was allowed to participate the whole night, which sort of surprised me. So they say that all of the scenarios, there were 31 different scenarios, that all of them were drawn from real events. That's a little hard to imagine, but I suppose they could exaggerate a real event and make it more like what we did. This real event was a dentist smuggling in arms. And so we were at the airport. There was a plane, an unmarked plane. The plane was there. It didn't come and go. It was parked. The pilot had been taken captive by the dentist, and there was a UPS truck. And some of the volunteers, the good volunteers, good role players, were UPS drivers who didn't have any idea what was going on, but there were a couple of bad UPS drivers who did know what was going on, and they were unloading the arms from the plane. And since all of us role player volunteers got bored doing one role, you could only be the pilot and get shot by the dentist, captured and shot by the dentist too many times before that got a little old. The bullets that they used were sort of like paintball game bullets, but they were colored chalk, and they hurt. And a couple of people had bloody wounds. I didn't, but it did hurt me when I got hit. So we traded roles, so everybody kind of got to do something interesting. The police, the team that was on duty at each time, we did the same scenario over and over again. And because all of the police teams were graded, it had to be pretty much the same. So they came out in one of the armored trucks for absolutely no reason at all. They could have come in police cars. They could have come on foot. Two of the bad UPS drivers started shooting at them, and I did that once, and that was kind of fun. And then they shot back, and the minute you were hit, and you knew you were hit because it hurt, you had to lie down and pretend to be dead. I don't think any of the good UPS drivers ever got killed, and that was one of the scoring criteria. So when they all came back when the teams came back to be debriefed inside this giant hangar, that was one of the things that the sheriff's office guy said. He said, first of all, none of you got killed. You're all going home to your families tonight. That was the first. Second, none of the good guys got killed. That was the second. Third, all of the bad guys got killed. And we did. We all got killed. So that was, it was not as though they stopped and interviewed us and, said, raise your hands and they didn't interrogate us. They interrogated the good guys. The bad guys just got killed. I think what I would like to do, if this is humanly possible, is try to distinguish between the legitimate emergency response practice that I think all of these teams need, distinguish between that and the clearly excessive militarization. And I don't know whether we can do that, but I have this fantasy that we will sit down in some comfortable room and with Boisson, I hope, and talk to the sheriff's office and some of the police departments about how to do this in a legitimate way. I don't know if that's possible, but that's one of the next actions that I would very much like to participate in. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Julia Wong. So I also had a chance to go to the conference as a journalist, and I spent 3 days there. The first 2 at the vendor show, and kind of poking my head into some of the seminars. And then on the 3rd day, I went on a VIP tour that was like a hosted tour with a couple of other journalists, and then different folks from different companies who were definitely the VIPs of the show and were being taken out to see their products being used in the field. And so one of the women who was on my VIP tour with us said, as we got it started, she was like, "This just makes me so proud to be an American." And that was kind of the tone of the VIP-ness. But I guess so. Some of the scenarios that we got to observe were they did a recreation of the Aurora theater shooting inside 850 Bryant, inside the jail. They had a recreation of the Munich Olympics, like a hostage situation at Candlestick Park. We went to the U.S. Air Marshals in South San Francisco, where they have like a fuselage of a plane that the Air Marshals use to train with. And there was like a plane hostage scenario there. And we also went out to Alameda County's Emergency Operations Center, which is like their state-of-the-art kind of center out. It's by Santa Rita. It's in the same complex as where the jail is. But it's like this center where they would operate and like run operations if there were a mass casualty event or if there were some kind of terrorist event, or like the earthquake in Napa had just happened. So a lot of people were talking about how, this was where, people were talking about like how some of the systems were the same as what had to be put into place after the earthquake. And I guess that, in reflecting on all the different things that I was able to see at the conference, I think that like the two big issues that kind of were constantly just on my mind and felt like, you know, we're always in the air and never being spoken about were fear and money. And the conference, you know, gets funded by the Department of Homeland Security, and because of that funding, everything that happens there is supposed to have a nexus to terrorism. And I kind of really felt like, as after the conference, that it was really a nexus between fear and money. Inside the vendor show, especially, it was just remarkable how much federal, state, local, just money was all around for these vendors. So many of them that I spoke to talked about how, you know, they'd gotten particular grants to build this and to build that. I spoke to, there was like a woman who had this very flashy dummy that it's like a life-size person dummy that you can use to do like CPR, and well, it's not just CPR, like it bleeds and it moans and it all sorts of crazy stuff happen, like its intestines are coming out, and like they have like they're like pumping blood. There's like a bucket of blood sitting next to it. And so I like watched them, and they had me like press on the artery to stop the blood. And then this woman chased after me, and she was like, "I just want you to know, we got a huge grant, and they've created these. They're creating one of these for dogs. So they're going to have so that canine units can practice doing like first response to rescue dogs, which is great. I mean, she was really excited about this money and this new project, and she showed me like a postcard of like a prototype or whatever. But you know, this was the same day that outside in Oakland there was an action for people who are fighting to get $15 an hour working at fast food restaurants. My sister is a public school teacher, and she only gets like one ream of paper per month for her 30 students. And so it was just, you know, crazy to me how much money was pouring into these different companies, and the needs that they are meeting are very, they're very, very particular, and I think a lot of them are kind of fantastical in the sense that they're made-up needs that they're meeting. Another of these like expensive things that I was really struck by was the DHS had a table, and they were showing a DNA testing machine. And it's a machine that in 90 minutes can get a positive ID on a person's DNA just from a cheek swab. So I was talking to this guy about why you would need something like this, and his answer was that they want to use them in refugee camps in order to help refugees like prove a familial relationship if they don't have the paperwork to prove the familial relationship, which I think is utter BS. I mean, it was also developed with money from the Department of Justice and the Department of Defense. So, I mean, we know that this is going to be used in you know, tracking people and in doing IDs for people. But I mean, he's talking about how they've developed this technology and how it's so much better than what DNA testing has to do now, which is, you know, it takes weeks. You have to send it out to a lab. And so I asked him, well, you know, I mean, there is like a huge need in so many different cities and states all across the country for DNA testing. I mean, you read all the time that there are like thousands, if not millions, of rape kits that have never been tested. So it would be great. Like, can this be used for that? And the answer is, of course, no. It's not useful for crime scene evidence. It's not useful for rape kits. This is, you know, all of this money has gone into this technology, but it's not actually, you know, addressing a need that people might really want from law enforcement. It's addressing the need to be able to identify us. And that was just, you know, one of thousands of ironies of kind of what all of this funding is going toward. And then I just going on the fear issue, I think that I was just incredibly struck by how all of the police officers and the SWAT teams that I was speaking to and that were, part of these scenarios, there was every single scenario that we went to, it was always about some terrorist threat, that would happen again. And it was always, the worst case scenario, no matter what. There was never an opportunity that, with an active shooter, there was never an opportunity that there would be a way to talk this person down. It was never a chance that this was a false alarm. It was always that this was the absolute worst case scenario, that you had to go in with the intention of shooting, to kill. They say it's shooting to neutralize, but all of these things, there was never any dispute resolution or any, trying to figure out a way to get out of a bad scenario without using the guns. And at the same time, and so it was always about terrorists. But when you actually talk to folks, what I was struck by was that what they ended up talking about as far as, the scenarios where they feel like they're going to use this training, it was always about the general populace. It was about urban crime. It was about using these stuff in crowd control and at protests. And, the spokesperson for urban crime, J.D. Nelson, he was, he told me, well, it's crazy out there in Oakland. People have guns. Which is true, but it's also true that crime in the U.S. has gone down every year since the 70s. So we're not, this is there's this huge amping up of this fear of what's going to happen that's not really matched by reality. And then, and then I felt, I spent some time at the protest, and there was an complete and total lack of understanding. I felt like that the folks who are at the protest, that there's real fear of the police from people at the protests, and there were more family members of more people who had been shot and killed by police at this protest. James Rivera Jr., Oscar Grant, Alan Bluford, Alex Lopez. Then there were victims of the Boston Marathon bombing. And so, I think that there was this triangle of fear, kind of, where you have the people outside the conference who are being told by the media and being told by the police that they need to be scared of terrorists, but who are actually scared of the police with good reason. And then you have the police who are also being told, by these corporations that want to use it to make money, that they need to be scared of terrorists, they need to be scared of terrorists, they need to be scared of terrorists, but are then going back and using those same tactics against the general populace, who are the people that they end up interacting with, and I think in a lot of ways are very afraid as well. Thanks.